The headlights of Sunwoo Park's black Escalade swept across the iron gates of his Atherton estate as the driver pulled into the private driveway. Atherton, California, a place where silence was a luxury people paid tens of millions of dollars for. He had just come from 14 straight hours of negotiations in downtown San Jose, a shipping logistics company with ports along the entire West Coast. $240 million on the table, 3 rival bidders, and by the end of it, Sunwoo walked away with a contract and every single term he wanted. That was what he did. He walked into rooms where powerful men sat, and he walked out with everything they thought was theirs. People called him a Korean Mafia boss. He never corrected them. The reputation was useful. It kept competitors afraid, kept business partners honest, and kept the media from digging too deep into the empire he had built from nothing. But the truth was simpler and less exciting than the rumors. Sunwoo's empire was legitimate. Commercial real estate across California, import-export operations spanning 3 continents. A private security firm that contracted with Fortune 500 companies. Everything legal, everything documented, everything earned through a combination of brilliance, brutality in negotiation, and a work ethic that bordered on self-punishment. He was 30 years old. He was worth more than he could spend in 3 lifetimes, and he was tired in a way that had nothing to do with the 14-hour meeting. His 2 bodyguards stepped out of the follow car and walked ahead of him toward the front entrance of the mansion. Sunwoo loosened his tie as he followed them up the stone path lined with Japanese maples. The night air was cool and damp. A light rain had passed through earlier, leaving everything slick and glistening under the landscape lighting. The lead bodyguard, a broad-shouldered man named Diho, stopped walking. He held up his hand. The second bodyguard immediately moved to flank Sunwoo. Sunwoo saw it before anyone said a word. There was a woman lying on the stone steps of his front door. She was on her side, curled into herself like she had tried to make her body as small as possible. One arm was tucked beneath her torso. The other was stretched out toward the door, fingers extended, like she had been reaching for the doorbell but collapsed before she could press it. There was blood, a lot of it. It had pooled beneath her body and run down the steps in a thin, dark stream that caught the light like oil. She was black, fair-skinned, with natural curls matted against her forehead from sweat and rain. She was wearing hospital scrubs, lavender-colored, the kind nurses wear. The scrubs were soaked through on her left side, and the blood was coming from somewhere just above her hip. A deep wound. Not a scratch, not a scrape, something deliberate. Diho reached for his phone to call the police. Sunwoo said, "Don't." He pushed past both bodyguards. He knelt beside the woman on the cold stone. He pressed 2 fingers against her neck, feeling for a pulse. It was there. Faint, thready, but there. Her skin was clammy and her breathing was shallow, the kind of breathing that meant she did not have a lot of time. Her eyes fluttered open, just for a second. She looked directly at him, her lips moved. She whispered something. "Not help, not please." She said, "Sunwoo." Then her eyes rolled back and she went limp. Sunwoo did not move for 3 full seconds. He stared at the unconscious woman's face. He had never seen her before in his life, he was certain of it. He had an exceptional memory for faces, a skill that had served him well in business and in the years before business. He did not know this woman, but this woman knew him. She knew his name, not his last name, which was public, his first name. And she had come to his home, bleeding in the middle of the night to find him. He made a decision, in the time it took to exhale. "Call Dr. Yoon," he told Diho. "Now, tell him it is an emergency and he has 20 minutes to get here." Sunwoo slid his arms beneath the woman's body and lifted her. She weighed almost nothing. Her head fell against his shoulder, and her blood soaked through his white dress shirt immediately, warm and spreading fast. He carried her through the front door, across the marble foyer, and into the ground floor study where there was a long leather couch. He laid her down carefully, grabbed a throw blanket from the armchair, and pressed it against the wound on her side to slow the bleeding. While he held pressure on the wound, he noticed something. Her left hand was clenched in a tight fist. He gently pried her fingers open. She was holding something, a photograph, crumpled and wet with her own blood. He smoothed it out on the couch beside her. Everything inside him went still. It was a photo of his mother. His mother, Yoonji Park. His mother, who died 11 years ago in a car accident on the Pacific Coast Highway. His mother, whose funeral he attended when he was 19 years old. His mother, whose death turned him from a boy into whatever he was now. The photo showed her sitting in a garden somewhere, smiling, older than he remembered her. Much older. The woman in the photo was not the 41-year-old mother he buried. She looked like she was in her 50s, maybe older. That was impossible. Sunwoo turned the photo over. On the back, in handwriting he did not recognize, someone had written 7 words. "They lied to you, ask her." Dr. Yoon arrived in 18 minutes. Sunwoo stood at the window of his study with his arms crossed and his blood-soaked shirt clinging to his chest while the doctor worked on the unconscious woman. He did not look at the doctor. He did not look at the woman. He stared at the dark lawn outside and held the photograph so tightly in his right hand that his knuckles turned white. His mother was dead. He had watched them lower the casket. He had thrown the first handful of dirt. He had stood at that grave every year on the anniversary and spoken to a headstone. But the woman in this photograph was older than the woman they buried. And the message on the back said they lied. The woman did not wake up until the following morning. Dr. Yoon, Sunwoo's private physician, had stabilized her through the night. The wound was caused by a blade. Clean, deliberate. Whoever had cut her knew exactly how deep to go, deep enough to cause serious bleeding, shallow enough to avoid the organs. This was not someone trying to kill her. This was someone sending a message, a warning. Sunwoo had not slept. He spent the night at his desk running her face through every database his security team had access to, corporate records, social media platforms, facial recognition software that Yeemin Ri, his head of security, had access to through private channels. Nothing came back. This woman was a ghost. No online presence. No records tied to her face, like she did not exist. At 7 in the morning, Di-ho radioed from the guest room upstairs. The woman was awake, and she was panicking. Sunwoo walked upstairs and heard the commotion before he reached the door. She was trying to rip the IV out of her arm. She had already knocked over the bedside table and was pressing herself into the corner of the room, wild-eyed, looking at Di-ho like he was a threat. Di-ho, to his credit, had not touched her. He was standing 6 feet away with his hands raised, trying to tell her she was safe. She did not look like she believed him. Sunwoo stepped into the room and said calmly, "Everyone out." Di-ho left. The door closed. It was just the two of them. The woman stared at Sunwoo from the corner. Her chest was heaving. Her curls were wild around her face, and the bandage on her side was spotted with fresh blood from her movement. She was scared. Genuinely, deeply scared. But underneath the fear, Sunwoo saw something else. Defiance. She was not the kind of person who stayed afraid for long. He pulled a chair from the desk, set it in the middle of the room, and sat down. He did not move toward her. He did not raise his voice. He reached into his jacket pocket and held up the blood-stained photograph of his mother. "Start talking," he said. Her name was Sandra Cole. She was 27 years old. She was a registered nurse at a private long-term care facility in Palo Alto, specializing in geriatric and palliative patients. She had worked there for 3 years. 8 months ago, a new patient was admitted to the facility under the name Mrs. Cho. She was elderly, frail, and terminally ill with late-stage kidney failure. She had no listed family, no emergency contacts. Her care was paid for in full by a private trust, and the facility administrators made it clear to the staff that Mrs. Cho was to be given the highest level of care with the lowest level of curiosity. No questions. No outside visitors, no exceptions. Sandra was assigned as her primary nurse. Over weeks and then months, Mrs. Cho grew attached to Sandra. It started small. She would hold Sandra's hand during treatments. She would ask Sandra to stay after her shift and sit with her. She would watch Sandra's face with this expression that Sandra could not name at first. Later, she realized what it was. It was love. The desperate, aching love of a woman who had been completely alone for a very long time and finally found someone kind enough to sit with her. Mrs. Cho began talking. At first, it was fragments, memories that seemed disconnected. A house in the Bay Area. Cherry blossom trees in a backyard, a boy who used to sing Korean folk songs off-key and bring her wildflowers from the garden. She spoke about this boy the way people speak about something sacred, like he was the best thing she had ever done in her life. Then the fragments became a story, and the story became a confession. Mrs. Cho told Sandra that her real name was not Cho. Her real name was Yoonji Park. She told Sandra that she had a son named Sunwoo. She told Sandra that 11 years ago, someone had staged her death to keep her silent, and she had spent every day since then locked away from the world, alive but erased, breathing but buried. Sandra stopped talking. She looked at Sunwoo, who had not moved from the chair. His face was completely blank, but his hands, resting on his knees, were shaking. "She was alive," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "My mother was alive this entire time." Sandra nodded slowly. "She died 4 months ago, in her sleep. I was holding her hand when it happened." Sunwoo stood up so fast the chair tipped over and hit the floor with a sharp crack. He walked to the door. He stopped. He put one hand on the door frame and his head dropped forward. "She talked about you every single day," Sandra said from behind him. Her voice was thick. "Every single day, Sunwoo. She said you were the reason she stayed quiet. Someone told her that if she ever tried to contact you, they would destroy you. Not hurt you, destroy you, take everything from you. She believed them. So she stayed hidden, for 11 years, to protect you." Sunwoo's shoulders rose and fell with a breath that sounded like it was being pulled from the bottom of his chest. He did not turn around. He walked out of the room, down the hallway, and Sandra heard nothing for a long time after that. Di-ho, standing outside the door, saw something he had never seen before and knew he would never speak of. Sunwoo Park, the man the entire West Coast called untouchable, pressed his back against the hallway wall, slid down to the floor, and put his face in his hands. He stayed there for a long time. When he came back to the guest room 20 minutes later, his face was composed. His eyes were dry, but something behind them had changed. Something had cracked open and would not close again. Sandra told him the rest. After Mrs. Cho, after Yoonji died, Sandra found a sealed envelope hidden inside her pillowcase. Inside was the photograph, the handwritten message, and a USB drive. Sandra took them. She did not know what they meant, but the dying woman had made her promise. "Promise me my son will know the truth. Promise me, Sandra." 3 days after Sandra took the envelope, someone broke into her apartment in Palo Alto while she was at work. Nothing was stolen, but every drawer was opened. Every cabinet emptied. Someone was looking for something specific. Sandra knew immediately what they wanted. She took the envelope and hid it at a storage locker. 1 week later, someone broke in again. This time they left a message on her kitchen counter. A single typed sentence on white paper. "Return what you took." Sandra did not return it. She ran. She moved to a motel, changed her routine, stopped using her regular phone. But they found her again. 2 nights ago, a man grabbed her in the parking lot behind a grocery store in Mountain View. He had a knife. He told her to hand over whatever Mrs. Cho had given her. Sandra fought back. He cut her. She broke free and ran, bleeding, for 6 blocks until she found an unlocked car and hid in the backseat until he gave up searching. She had nowhere to go, no one to trust. The only thing she had was a name, Sunwoo Park, the son that Yoonji talked about constantly. The man who, according to his dying mother, had the power to make this right. So Sandra drove to Atherton. She found the estate. She made it to the front steps, and then her body gave out. "The USB drive," Sunwoo said. "Where is it now?" "Storage locker in Palo Alto," Sandra said. "Locker 114. Key is in the zippered pocket of my scrub pants, the ones I was wearing when I got here." Sunwoo looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. "Yeemin, I need you at the estate. Now bring Preya." Yeemin re-arrived within the hour. Former military intelligence. Korean-American. Sharp-featured with a quiet intensity that made most people uncomfortable. He had worked for Sunwoo for 6 years and was the only person alive that Sunwoo trusted without reservation. Preya Nair arrived 30 minutes after. 26 years old. Born in Fremont, California. She ran the cybersecurity division of Sunwoo's company and could crack encryptions that government agencies struggled with. She showed up with 2 laptops, a portable hard drive, and a bag of hot Cheetos. Sunwoo briefed them in his study with the door closed. He told them everything Sandra had told him. He watched their faces change as the story unfolded. Yeemin's jaw tightened. Preya stopped chewing her hot Cheetos. He sent a team to retrieve the USB drive from the storage locker. It was there, exactly where Sandra said it would be. Priya started working on the encryption immediately. Meanwhile, Yimin pulled Sunwoo aside in the hallway. I ran her background, he said, keeping his voice low. Sandra Cole, 27, registered nurse just like she said, Baltimore native, parents deceased. One younger brother, Tobias Cole, sophomore at Howard University in D.C. She sends him money every month, $1,500 like clockwork. And she is clean, too clean, no debt, no criminal record, no social media presence at all, no Instagram, no Twitter, no Facebook, nothing. For a 27-year-old woman in the Bay Area, that is unusual. Maybe she values privacy. Maybe, or maybe she has been hiding for longer than she told you. Sunwoo considered this. Keep watching her, but do it quietly. He walked back to the guest room to check on Sandra and found her standing in the middle of the room, fully dressed in borrowed clothes from the housekeeper, trying to pull on her shoes with one hand while the other pressed against her bandaged side. What are you doing? He asked from the doorway. Leaving, she said without looking up. I delivered the photograph. I told you what your mother said. You have the USB drive. You do not need me here anymore. You were stabbed 2 nights ago. I am a nurse. I know how to take care of a wound. You showed up at my door half dead. And now I am half alive, which is an improvement. She finally got her shoe on and straightened up, wincing. Look, I did what she asked me to do. I got the message to her son. My part is done. I have a life. I have a job. I have a brother who needs me to wire him money by Friday or he cannot pay his meal plan at Howard. I cannot just disappear into some billionaire's mansion and play witness protection. Sunwoo leaned against the door frame. Whoever cut you is still out there. You go back to your life, they will find you again, and next time the blade will go deeper. I have handled worse. I believe you, but handling worse does not mean you should have to. Sandra looked at him then, really looked at him. He was still wearing the blood-stained shirt from last night, her blood. He had not changed. He had not slept. His eyes were red-rimmed and his jaw was tight, and he looked like a man who was holding himself together through sheer force of will. Why do you care? She asked. You do not know me. You are right, I do not, but you knew my mother. You sat with her. You held her hand when she died. You are the last person on this earth who heard her voice, and you came to my door bleeding to keep a promise you made to a dying woman you had no obligation to. He paused. I cannot get those 11 years back. I cannot bring her back. But the answers you are running from are the same answers I have been searching for my entire adult life, and I cannot get them without you. The room was quiet for a long time. Sandra looked at the floor, then at the window, then back at him. I am not your employee, she said. I am not your guest, and I am definitely not your charity case. Understood. And I want my own bathroom. Something shifted at the corner of Sunwoo's mouth. It was not quite a smile, but it was close. You will have your own wing. Sandra stayed. The first 2 days were awkward. Sandra was fiercely independent, and Sunwoo's estate was a world she had no frame of reference for. The kitchen alone was bigger than her entire apartment. The housekeeper kept asking if she needed anything, and Sandra kept saying no even when she clearly needed things like fresh bandages and food that was not instant ramen from the gas station she had been living on for weeks. Sunwoo noticed. He did not say anything. He just made sure the kitchen was stocked with things she might actually eat. He noticed she drank her coffee black and that she read medical journals on her phone during downtime. He noticed that she called her brother Tobias every evening at 8 and that her voice changed when she talked to him. It became softer, lighter, like she was a different person when she was not carrying the weight of everything alone. On the second night, Sandra could not sleep. The stitches on her side pulled every time she turned over, and the unfamiliar silence of a mansion was louder than any city noise she was used to. She went downstairs to the kitchen at midnight to make tea. Sunwoo was already there, sitting at the island counter in the dark. The photograph of his mother was on the counter in front of him, illuminated only by the under-cabinet lights. He was just staring at it, not touching it, just staring. Sandra stopped in the doorway. She almost turned around. But something about the way he was sitting, the absolute stillness of a man who was falling apart so quietly that no one would ever know unless they walked into this exact kitchen at this exact moment, made her stay. She did not say anything. She walked to the stove, boiled water, and made 2 cups of tea. She set one in front of him on the counter. Then she turned around and walked out. She was halfway down the hall when she heard him pick up the cup. It was the first kind thing anyone had done for Sunwoo in a very long time that did not come with a contract, an invoice, or an expectation. He drank every drop. It took Priya 3 days to crack the encryption on the USB drive. When she did, she called Sunwoo immediately. He came to his corporate office in San Jose and sat across from her at the conference table. Yi-min stood by the door. Priya turned her laptop around to show them what was on the drive. It was everything. Medical records from the private facility in Scottsdale, Arizona, where Yoonji Park had been kept for 11 years under the name Mrs. Cho. Financial transactions showing monthly payments to the facility from a trust account. Legal documents creating the fake identity, transfer orders, admission paperwork, and audio recordings. Priya played the first one. The sound quality was slightly muffled, like it was recorded on a phone hidden in a pocket. 2 men were talking. One voice Sunwoo did not recognize. The other voice made him stop breathing. It was his uncle, Moon-sik Cho, his mother's brother. In the recording, Moon-sik was giving instructions. He was telling the unidentified man to make sure Yoonji's medication schedule was adjusted to keep her calm and compliant. He was discussing payment for the next quarter. He was talking about Sunwoo. He said, "The boy cannot know. If he finds out, everything falls apart. He will come for all of us." Sunwoo pressed the spacebar to pause the recording. "Play the next one," he said. The second recording was longer. In it, Moon-sik explained the full scope of what he had done. 11 years ago, Yoonji had discovered that Moon-sik had been embezzling from their father's estate for years. Their father, Sunwoo's grandfather, had built a small but significant fortune in Korea before the family immigrated to the United States in the 1990s. When the grandfather died, the estate was supposed to be split between Yoonji and Moon-sik, with a substantial portion held in trust for Sunwoo. Moon-sik had diverted the trust funds into his own accounts. He used the money to build his chain of luxury hotels across the West Coast. Every dollar of his success was built on money he stole from his own sister and nephew. When Yoonji found out, she confronted him. She told him she was going to tell Sunwoo everything. Moon-sik panicked. He could not let that happen. If Sunwoo found out, Moon-sik would lose everything. His money, his reputation, his standing in the Korean-American business community that he had spent decades building. So Moon-sik arranged the car accident. Yoonji's car was run off the Pacific Coast Highway, but she was not in it when it went over the cliff. She had been pulled from the vehicle minutes before by men Moon-sik had hired. She was sedated, transported to Arizona, and placed in the care facility under a false name. Moon-sik paid for everything. He controlled everything. And he told Yoonji that if she ever tried to reach her son, he would make sure Sunwoo was destroyed. Not physically, financially. Socially, completely, Moon-sik had connections, powerful connections, and Yoonji, isolated and afraid, believed him. So she stayed silent for 11 years. She stayed silent, and she watched her son grow up through news articles and business magazines that the facility staff occasionally brought her. She stayed silent, and she died without ever hearing his voice again. Sunwoo listened to all 4 recordings without moving. When they were finished, the conference room was silent. Priya was staring at her keyboard. Yi-min was watching Sunwoo with the careful attention of a man who knew what contained violence looked like. Sunwoo did not scream. He did not throw anything. He did not slam his fists on the table. He sat perfectly still with his hands flat on the surface in front of him and his eyes focused on a point somewhere beyond the wall. Moon-sik Cho, the man who stood beside him at his mother's funeral, the man who put his arm around a sobbing 19-year-old Sunwoo and told him to be strong, the man who helped him secure his first investors, the man who mentored him through the early years of building his empire, the man he called uncle, the man he trusted. "Sunwoo," Yi-min said quietly. "I need the room," Sunwoo said. His voice was flat, empty. They left. The door closed. Sunwoo sat alone in the conference room for 45 minutes. When he came out, his face was composed and his instructions were precise. He told Yi-min to compile a complete file on Moon-sik's financial holdings, business associates, and travel schedule. He told Priya to make backup copies of everything on the USB drive and store them in 3 separate secure locations. He told his legal team to begin a forensic audit of his family's estate records going back 25 years. Then he drove back to Atherton. Sandra was sitting on the back patio reading when he walked through the house. She looked up and immediately knew something had changed. His face was the same controlled mask he always wore, but his eyes were different, darker, like someone had blown out a candle behind them. "What was on the drive?" she asked. He told her everything, and then he asked her to tell him about his mother's last months, not the medical details, the human ones. Sandra set her book down and talked for over an hour. She told him how Yoonji loved the color yellow and insisted on having yellow flowers in her room at all times. She told him how Yoonji would ask Sandra to read to her in English because she said the language sounded like music when Sandra spoke it. She told him how Yoonji kept a small notebook where she wrote letters to Sunwoo that she never sent, filling page after page with things she wanted to tell him. What she ate for breakfast. What the weather was like. How she saw a hummingbird outside her window, and it reminded her of the garden they used to have. "She said you used to sing to her," Sandra said softly. "Korean folk songs. She said you were terrible at it, completely off-key. She said it was the most beautiful sound she ever heard." Sunwoo stood up and walked inside without a word. Sandra let him go. She understood that some grief was too big to carry in front of another person. That night, Sunwoo was woken at 2 a.m. by an alert from his security team. Someone had breached the outer perimeter of the estate. Yi-min's team intercepted the intruder within minutes. It was not a random break-in. The person was carrying a burner phone with a single text message on the screen. "Bring the nurse to Scottsdale, or the brother pays." Sunwoo read the message twice. Then he went upstairs and knocked on Sandra's door. When she opened it and saw his face, she knew. She knew before he said a single word. Her hand went to her mouth and she whispered, "Tobias." Her younger brother had been taken. Sandra fell apart, completely and totally fell apart. She collapsed against the doorframe of the guest room and slid to the floor, and the sound that came out of her was not a scream. It was something worse. It was the sound of a person whose entire reason for existing had just been ripped away. Tobias, her baby brother, her 19-year-old baby brother who was supposed to be safe at Howard University in Washington, D.C., 3,000 miles away from all of this. Tobias, who she had raised since she was 19 years old after their parents died in a house fire in Baltimore. Tobias, who she worked double shifts and triple shifts for. Tobias, who she skipped meals for so he could have new textbooks. Tobias, who got into Howard on a partial scholarship because he was brilliant, genuinely brilliant, and Sandra covered the rest of his tuition with every spare dollar she earned. He was all she had. He was the only family she had left on this earth, and now he was gone because she made a promise to a dying woman. Sunwoo knelt in front of her on the hallway floor. He did not touch her. He waited until she could hear him. Then he said, "Sandra, look at me." She looked up. Her face was wet and her eyes were wild with terror. "I am going to get him back," Sunwoo said. "Not because I owe you, not because of what you did for my mother. I am going to get him back because I know what it means to have someone stolen from you, and I am not going to stand here and watch it happen to someone else." He meant it, every word, and Sandra, through her tears, could see that he meant it. Sunwoo mobilized everything he had, his entire security apparatus, his contacts, his resources. Within an hour, Yi-min had traced the burner phone's signal to a location in Scottsdale, Arizona, the same city where the care facility was located, the same city where Yoonji had spent 11 years in captivity. This was not a coincidence. Someone was cleaning house, tying up loose ends. Sandra was a loose end. The USB drive was a loose end, and now Tobias was leverage. They flew to Scottsdale on Sunwoo's private jet. Sandra sat rigid in her seat, staring straight ahead, her hands gripped together in her lap so tight her knuckles were pale. Sunwoo sat across from her going through intel reports from Yi-min on his tablet. Halfway through the flight, exhaustion finally won. Sandra's eyes closed and her head tipped sideways against the seat. She was asleep in seconds, her body finally surrendering to the 3 weeks of running, the blood loss, and the terror. Sunwoo looked at her for a long moment. Then he took off his suit jacket and laid it over her carefully, making sure not to wake her. He sat back down and turned to the window and stared at the dark sky below. He realized something. For the first time in years, he was not fighting for money. He was not fighting for power. He was not fighting for reputation or territory or leverage. He was fighting for something that actually mattered. And the woman sleeping across from him, this stubborn, fierce, selfless woman who had nearly bled to death on his doorstep for a promise she made to his mother, she mattered too, more than he was ready to admit. In Scottsdale, Sun Woo's team moved fast. Yi Min had pinpointed Tobias's location to a rented property on the outskirts of the city, a nondescript house in a quiet neighborhood. 2 men were inside with Tobias, private contractors, not professionals. Moonsik had hired them through a middleman. Sun Woo's security team executed a precise, coordinated extraction. No weapons fired, no shots, no violence. They used access codes obtained from intercepted communications between the contractors and the middleman, and they walked through the front door before either man even realized what was happening. The 2 contractors were detained without a single punch thrown. Yi Min's people were that good. Tobias was in the back bedroom. He was sitting on the floor with his wrists zip-tied in front of him, wearing a Howard University sweatshirt and glasses that were crooked on his face. He was shaking but unharmed. When the door opened and Sandra ran in, he looked up at his sister and his face crumpled. "Sandra," his voice broke on her name. She dropped to her knees and pulled him into her arms so hard he could barely breathe. She was crying. He was crying too, trying not to, failing completely. She held his face in her hands and checked him for injuries, running her fingers over his head, his arms, his wrists where the zip ties had been cut away. He kept saying, "I am okay, I am okay," and she kept shaking her head because she needed to see for herself. Sun Woo stood in the doorway of the bedroom watching them. Yi Min was beside him. After a moment, Yi Min glanced over and saw Sun Woo look away, jaw tight, blinking too hard. Yi Min did not say a word. Some things you just let be. They flew back to Atherton that same night. Tobias fell asleep on the plane with his head on Sandra's shoulder, and Sandra did not move for 3 hours even though her injured side was screaming. While they were in Scottsdale, Sun Woo's team had also visited the care facility where Yoonji had spent her final years. Most of the staff had been replaced since her death, and the records had been largely scrubbed. But one person remained, an older Filipina nurse named Consulo who had worked at the facility for over 15 years. She remembered Mrs. Cho. She remembered the son that Mrs. Cho never stopped talking about. Consulo told Sun Woo's team that after Yoonji died, the facility received instructions to destroy all personal belongings. Consulo was supposed to clean out the room, but she found something she could not bring herself to throw away. A handwritten letter, sealed in an envelope, addressed to a name she did not recognize at the time. Sunwoo Park. Consulo kept it. She did not know why. She just felt like she was supposed to. She gave it to them. The letter arrived at the Atherton estate the next day by secure courier. Sunwoo held the envelope in his hands for a long time before opening it. His mother's handwriting was on the front. He recognized it instantly. The way she formed her characters, the slight leftward slant. He went to his study, he locked the door, and he read his mother's final letter. It was 3 pages long, written in Korean, every word in her hand. She told him everything Moonsik had done. The embezzlement, the staged accident, the years of captivity disguised as medical care. She told him about the deal that kept her silent. "Your uncle told me that if I ever reached for you, he would burn everything you built to the ground. I believed him. Maybe I should not have. Maybe I should have fought, but you were all I had left, Sunwoo. You were the only thing they could not take from me as long as you were safe, so I stayed quiet. And every day I stayed quiet, I died a little more." She told him about Sandra, the nurse who changed everything. "She is good, Sunwoo. She is kind in a way that has been beaten out of most people by the world. She sat with me when no one else did. She listened. She did not have to care about an old woman with no name and no visitors, but she did. She is the reason you are reading this letter. If she finds you, if she keeps the promise she made me, take care of her. Not because I asked, because she deserves someone in her corner for once." The final paragraph hit Sunwoo like a freight train. "My beautiful boy, I did not stay away because I stopped loving you. I stayed away because loving you was the only thing I had left and I could not let them take that too. Do not let anger be what defines you now. You are more than what they made you. You always were, but if you must fight, fight with your eyes open. Moonsik is not the only one. There is someone above him, someone who funded everything. Find the name Garrett Whitfield. He holds the rest of the truth. Sunwoo put the letter down on his desk. His hands were shaking so badly that the pages rattled against the wood. He pressed his palms flat on the desk and closed his eyes and breathed. Then he made a phone call. He called Moonsik's personal number. His uncle answered on the third ring. Sunwoo, it has been too long. How are you? Sunwoo said, I know what you did. I have the recordings. I have the financial records. I have everything. The line went silent. Meet me at your hotel in Beverly Hills tomorrow at noon, Sunwoo said. Do not make me come find you. He hung up. The next day, Sunwoo walked into the penthouse suite of Moonsik's flagship luxury hotel in Beverly Hills. Moonsik was waiting. He was a polished man in his early 60s, silver-haired, well-dressed, with the kind of easy confidence that came from decades of being the smartest person in every room. He smiled when Sunwoo entered. Sunwoo did not smile. He sat down across from his uncle and placed a small speaker on the table between them. He pressed play. Moonsik's own voice filled the room. The boy cannot know. If he finds out, everything falls apart. The smile disappeared from Moonsik's face, like someone had wiped it off with a cloth. Sunwoo let the recording play for 90 seconds. Then he stopped it. The silence that followed was enormous. She was alive, uncle, Sunwoo said in Korean. His voice was quiet, controlled, terrifying in its calm. My mother was alive for 11 years. She was alone. She was afraid. She died without me, and you stood next to me at her funeral and told me to be strong. Moonsik tried to speak. He started with a word Sunwoo already knew was coming. I was protecting. Do not, Sunwoo's voice cut like a blade. Do not say you were protecting the family. You were protecting yourself. You stole my grandfather's money. You stole my inheritance. And when my mother found out, you did not face the consequences like a man. You buried her alive. You used her love for me as a prison, and you locked her in it for over a decade. Moonsik's composure cracked. His hands were trembling on the table. You do not understand the position I was in. I understand perfectly. You were a thief who got caught by his own sister, and instead of accepting responsibility, you erased her from existence. Sunwoo leaned forward. You have 48 hours. Liquidate every asset connected to the embezzled funds. Transfer every dollar with interest into a trust that my legal team will designate. If you do not, every recording, every document, every piece of evidence goes to the FBI, the IRS, and every news outlet on the West Coast. Moonsik's face was gray. You would do that to your own family. Sunwoo stood up. He looked down at the man who was once the most important figure in his life after his mother, and he felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a vast, empty space where trust used to live. You are not my family, Sunwoo said. You stopped being my family the night you buried an empty casket and watched me cry over it. He walked out without looking back. That evening, Sandra found Sunwoo sitting alone in the garden behind the estate. The California sky was turning purple and orange above the oak trees, and he was sitting on a stone bench near the koi pond with the letter from his mother folded in his lap. He was not crying, but the evidence of it was all over his face. Sandra almost walked away. She almost gave him his privacy, but something pulled her forward. She sat down beside him on the bench. She did not say anything for a while. They just sat in the quiet. Then Sandra said, she used to hum a song every evening, a Korean melody. She never told me the name, but I heard it so many times I learned it. She hummed it, softly, under the darkening sky. Sunwoo closed his eyes. His jaw trembled. He knew the song. It was the same lullaby his mother sang to him when he was a child. The same one he could never quite remember the melody to, no matter how hard he tried. Sandra's hand moved across the bench and settled on top of his. He did not pull away. He turned his palm up and her fingers slid between his and they sat like that, hand in hand, while the last light faded from the sky. Neither of them said a word. Neither of them needed to. The name from his mother's letter haunted Sunwoo, Garrett Whitfield. Priya and Yi-min dug into Whitfield's background over the next several days. and what they found made the situation significantly more dangerous. Garrett Whitfield was a billionaire venture capitalist based in Newport Beach, California, one of the wealthiest communities in the country. He sat on the boards of 3 Fortune 500 companies. He had donated millions to hospitals, universities, and political campaigns on both sides of the aisle. His name was on the wings of buildings. His face was in Forbes. He played golf with senators. He was, by every public measure, one of the most respected and untouchable men in American business. But buried beneath the polished surface was something much uglier. Whitfield had been the original American partner who helped wealthy Korean families establish business footholds in the United States going back 25 years. Sunwoo's grandfather was one of those families. Whitfield provided connections, legal cover, and political access. In exchange, he took enormous hidden cuts from the family's wealth. He leveraged immigration anxieties, language barriers, and cultural pressure to keep the families compliant. He was not a partner. He was a parasite. When Moonsik began embezzling from the family estate, Whitfield was not just aware of it. He was taking a percentage. Moonsik was funneling money to Whitfield in exchange for continued protection and access to American power networks. It was an arrangement that had been running for over 2 decades. And when Yoonji discovered the full scope of Moonsik's theft and Whitfield's involvement, it was Whitfield who designed the plan to make her disappear. Moonsik was just the family member who carried it out. Whitfield was the architect, the puppeteer, the man who decided that a mother's life was an acceptable cost of doing business. Sunwoo absorbed this information in the conference room of his San Jose headquarters with the same terrifying stillness that Yi Min had come to recognize. When Priya finished her briefing, Sunwoo asked one question. How many other families did he do this to? Priya looked at Yi Min. Yi Min looked at the floor. At least 7 that we can trace, Priya said. Korean, Vietnamese, Chinese families, all of them came to the U.S. with money and ended up under Whitfield's thumb. Some lost everything. Some just lost most of it. None of them ever talked because Whitfield had leverage on all of them. Sunwoo nodded slowly. Find me the ones who are willing to talk now. Meanwhile, Sandra made a decision that nearly cost her everything. She went back to her apartment in Palo Alto. She needed documents for Tobias. His enrollment paperwork, his insurance information, records she needed to ensure his semester at Howard was not disrupted by any of this chaos. She told Deho she would be 30 minutes. She walked into her apartment and froze. It had been destroyed. Not just searched this time, destroyed. Every piece of furniture was overturned. Her nursing textbooks were torn apart. Her clothes were shredded. The photographs of her parents were smashed on the floor, glass everywhere. And on the bathroom mirror, written in thick black marker, were 5 words. You should have stayed dead. Sandra backed out of the apartment with her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth. She called Deho, who called Yi Min, who called Sunwoo. When Sandra arrived back at the estate, Sunwoo was waiting in the foyer. His face was controlled, but his eyes were burning. He looked at Sandra and said, You went alone. I needed documents for Tobias. You went alone, without security, without telling anyone, after everything that has happened. I am not your employee, Sunwoo. I do not need your permission. This is not about permission. His voice rose for the first time since she had known him. This is about you being alive tomorrow. Do you understand that? Whoever wrote that message on your mirror wants you dead. Not scared. Dead. And you walked into your apartment alone like none of this is real. I have been taking care of myself since I was 19 years old. And you have done an incredible job of it, but you are not alone anymore. You do not have to do everything by yourself. I already lost someone because I was not there. He stopped himself. The words had come out before he could catch them. The anger drained from his face and something raw and unguarded took its place. I lost my mother because I was not there. I am not going to lose someone else because she was too stubborn to let me help. The words hung in the air between them. He said someone else, not a witness, not an asset, not a temporary arrangement, someone else. Like she had become a person who mattered to him in a way he had not planned for and did not know how to handle. Sandra stared at him. He looked away first. He always looked away first when she got too close to whatever was really going on behind his eyes. She did not push. She just said quietly, Okay, next time I will take Deho. He nodded. He walked away. And Sandra stood in the foyer with her heart doing something she absolutely did not have time for. Later that evening, Sunwoo passed through the kitchen and found Tobias sitting at the island counter with a corporate finance textbook open in front of him. Tobias was highlighting something with a yellow marker, his glasses slightly crooked. Sunwoo paused. Corporate finance. Tobias looked up. Yeah. It is my major. Well, finance and data analytics double major. That is ambitious. Sandra says ambitious is just another word for too stubborn to pick one thing. Sunwoo almost smiled. He sat down on the opposite side of the island and they talked for 20 minutes about valuation models and market analysis. Tobias was smart, not just textbook smart, naturally sharp, the kind of mind that saw patterns other people missed. If you want a summer internship, Sunwoo said, my company has a program. It is competitive, but I could put in a word. Tobias looked across the room at Sandra, who was reading on the couch. She gave a small nod. Tobias grinned. It was wide and genuine, and it transformed his whole face. For real. For real. It was the first time Sunwoo had smiled since this entire nightmare began. A real smile. Small but real. And Yi-min, who was passing through the hallway, saw it and thought, well, that is new. Sunwoo did not go after Garrett Whitfield with threats or intimidation. He went after him the way a chess master takes a king, by removing every piece around him first. Over the course of 2 weeks, Sunwoo's legal team, forensic accountants, and Priya's cybersecurity unit compiled an airtight case. Financial fraud, coercion, conspiracy, systematic exploitation of immigrant families over a 25-year period. Every transaction was documented. Every shell company was traced. Every hidden account was mapped. Sunwoo reached out to 3 other Korean-American families who had been victimized by Whitfield's scheme. 2 of them agreed to come forward. Their testimonies were devastating. One family had lost a restaurant empire they had spent 30 years building. Another had been pressured into signing over mineral rights to property they owned in Alaska that turned out to be worth $40 million. These were families who had come to America with hope and hard work, and had been systematically stripped of what they built by a man who smiled in their faces while robbing them blind. Moon-sik, faced with Sunwoo's 48-hour ultimatum, folded completely. He liquidated his hotel assets. He transferred the embezzled funds plus interest into a trust designated by Sunwoo's legal team. He cooperated fully, providing documentation and testimony about his arrangement with Whitfield. In exchange, Sunwoo did not release the recordings publicly. But Sunwoo made one thing clear. Moon-sik was to leave the country. He was to never contact Sunwoo again. Not a phone call, not a letter, not a message through a third party. Nothing, ever. Moon-sik flew to Korea the next day. He did not say goodbye. There was nothing left to say. With Moon-sik's testimony and the documentary evidence, Sunwoo's legal team prepared a comprehensive filing for federal investigators. Simultaneously, Sunwoo arranged something that would ensure the story could not be buried by Whitfield's political connections and media influence. He held a press conference. In the main auditorium of his corporate headquarters in San Jose, Sunwoo stood behind a podium in front of cameras from every major news network. His legal team flanked him on both sides. 2 of the victim families stood behind him. Sandra watched from backstage on a monitor. Tobias stood beside her. Sunwoo did not make it personal. He did not mention his mother by name. He did not talk about his grief or his rage or the 11 years that had been stolen from him. He framed the entire presentation around a systemic issue: the exploitation of immigrant families by American power brokers who weaponized trust and access. He presented the evidence clearly and methodically: financial records, shell company structures, testimony excerpts. Every slide was damning, every document was verified. By the time he finished, the room was silent. A reporter asked, "Mr. Park, you are alleging that one of the most prominent venture capitalists in the country systematically defrauded multiple immigrant families. Do you have any personal connection to these allegations?" Sunwoo paused. For just a moment, the mask slipped, just enough for anyone paying attention to see the man underneath. I have a personal connection to what it means to lose someone because powerful people decided that your family did not matter enough to protect, he said. No further comment on that. The story went viral before the press conference was over. National news picked it up within hours. By evening, it was trending on every social media platform. By the next morning, Whitfield's board memberships were collapsing like dominoes. His political allies were distancing themselves publicly. Federal investigators announced they were opening a formal case. Garrett Whitfield, the untouchable billionaire of Newport Beach, was no longer untouchable. After the press conference, Sunwoo walked backstage. The adrenaline was draining out of him, and what was left behind was exhaustion and something he had not felt in so long he almost did not recognize it. Relief. It was not over. The legal process would take months, maybe years, but the truth was out. It could not be buried again. Sandra was waiting for him behind the stage curtain. She looked at him. He was leaning against the wall with his tie loosened and his eyes red-rimmed. He looked like a man who had just laid down something impossibly heavy that he had been carrying for a very long time. Your mother would have been so proud of you, Sandra said. He looked at her. His voice was rough when he said, she would have loved you. She always loved people who fought even when they were scared. Sandra blinked, and 2 tears rolled down her cheeks. Sunwoo reached out and gently tucked a curl behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her temple for just a moment. It was the most tender thing he had ever done in his entire life. And standing there backstage, with the noise of reporters and cameras on the other side of the curtain, something between them finally stopped being unspoken. 6 months later, Garrett Whitfield was indicted on 14 counts of financial fraud, conspiracy, and coercion. His assets were frozen pending trial. The families he had exploited began receiving restitution through a fund that Sunwoo personally established and endowed with $50 million. The fund was named the Yoonji Park Foundation. Its mission was to provide legal protection, financial advocacy, and educational support for immigrant families targeted by predatory business practices. The foundation was Sandra's idea. Sunwoo just wrote the check. Sunwoo flew to Scottsdale one more time, this time alone. He visited his mother's real grave, a quiet plot in a small cemetery on the outskirts of the city that Sandra had helped him locate through Consulo at the care facility. He brought white chrysanthemums, the Korean flower for mourning and remembrance. He placed them on the headstone and sat down on the grass beside it. He read her letter out loud, all 3 pages. His voice broke twice, but he finished it. Then he sat quietly and told her things. He told her about the foundation in her name. He told her about the press conference. He told her about Moonsick leaving and Whitfield's indictment. Then he told her about Sandra. You were right about her, Oma, he said. She is good. She is stubborn and she argues with me about everything and she makes terrible coffee, but she makes it for me anyway. She kept her promise to you. She found me, and I think maybe you knew she would. He sat there for a long time. The sun moved across the sky. A bird sang somewhere in a tree nearby. And for the first time since all of this began, Sunwoo felt something inside him settle into place. Not peace exactly, but the beginning of it. Sandra did not stay at the Atherton estate permanently. She went back to work, but not at the private facility. Sunwoo connected her with a contact at Stanford Medical Center, one of the top hospitals in the country, and they offered her a position in the critical care unit. It was the job she had wanted since nursing school, but never had the connections or the time to pursue. She was clear about one thing when Sunwoo told her about the opportunity. I earned this position. You only opened the door. I know, he said. I am serious. I passed every interview. I met every qualification. I know, Sandra. I do not want anyone thinking I got this because of you. No one who spends more than 5 minutes with you would think that. She looked at him, then she smiled. It was small and reluctant, like she was annoyed at herself for finding him charming. He filed that smile away in a place he would never admit existed. Tobias went back to Howard. He was thriving. His grades were excellent, and he had been accepted into Sunwoo's summer internship program at the company's San Jose headquarters. He called Sandra every Sunday evening and Sunwoo every Wednesday night. Sunwoo pretended to find the Wednesday calls inconvenient. He moved his entire Wednesday evening schedule around to make sure he was available. Yimin noticed and said nothing. Priya noticed and said, "That is adorable." Sunwoo told her she was fired. She was not fired. Sunwoo and Sandra did not rush into anything. They were two people who had been shattered by loss at young ages and had rebuilt themselves alone, without help, without softness, without anyone to lean on. Trust was not something either of them gave easily. Love was even harder. But it came, slowly, stubbornly, like everything else about both of them. Their first real date was not at some Michelin-starred restaurant in San Francisco or a rooftop bar in Beverly Hills. Sandra told Sunwoo to clear his Saturday night and refused to tell him where they were going. She drove them to a night market in San Jose. Tents and food stalls and string lights and live music and hundreds of people crowded together eating and laughing and being loud in exactly the way Sunwoo's carefully controlled world never was. She made him try everything: Thai iced tea, elote, mochi donuts, Filipino barbecue on a stick. He ate a funnel cake for the first time in his life and got powdered sugar on his nose and did not notice. Sandra looked at him standing there in his $2,000 jacket with powdered sugar on his face like a 5-year-old, and she laughed so hard she snorted. Then she clamped her hand over her mouth in absolute horror. Sunwoo looked at her, and the expression on his face was something Yimin or Diho or Priya or anyone who knew him would not have believed if they had seen it. He looked at her like she had invented sunlight. Like every sharp edge in him had been quietly sanding itself down since the night she bled on his doorstep, and he was only just now realizing what was underneath. "Did you just snort?" he asked. "No." "You absolutely did." "It did not happen. We are never speaking of this again." "I am going to speak of this constantly. Sunwoo. For the rest of my life." She threw a piece of funnel cake at him. He caught it and ate it. And they walked through the night market hand in hand like two normal people on a Saturday night, which is all either of them had ever really wanted to be. He told her he loved her on a Tuesday. It was not during a grand gesture. It was not at a dramatic moment or a beautiful location. They were in his kitchen. She was making coffee. He was sitting at the island counter reading something on his tablet. Morning light was coming through the windows, and she was wearing one of his old Stanford t-shirts, and her curls were piled on top of her head in a messy bun, and she yawned and stretched and said, "I should probably head home." And Sunwoo said, without looking up from his tablet, "Or you could stay. Not just tonight. Always." Sandra put the coffee mug down. She turned around and looked at him. He finally looked up. His face was calm, but his eyes were not. His eyes were terrified. The most powerful man on the West Coast, the man who could sit across from billionaires and senators without blinking, was terrified of what a 27-year-old nurse from Baltimore was about to say. "Are you asking me to move in with you?" Sandra said slowly, using the least romantic delivery in human history. "Yes." She stared at him. He stared back. The coffee machine beeped. "Okay," she said. He blinked. "Okay. Okay. Just okay. No conditions, no counterproposal, no negotiation." "Sunwoo," I said, "okay, take the yes." He stood up. He walked around the island. He took her face in his hands and kissed her forehead, then her nose, then her mouth. And Sandra, who had been taking care of herself since she was 19 years old, who had never leaned on anyone for anything, who had never let herself need something she could not provide on her own, leaned into him and let herself be held. 3 months after that Tuesday, on a warm evening in early fall, Sunwoo stood in the garden behind his Atherton estate. The same garden where Sandra had hummed his mother's lullaby all those months ago. The koi pond caught the last of the sunset. The oak trees rustled in a light breeze. Sandra stood beside him. Inside the house, Tobias was arguing with Yimin about basketball. Tobias was insisting that the Wizards were going to make the playoffs this year, and Yimin was telling him that was statistically impossible, and Tobias was saying statistics did not account for heart, and Yimin was saying that was the most ridiculous thing he had ever heard, and they were both enjoying themselves immensely. Priya was in the kitchen eating everything in sight and trying to teach Diho how to use TikTok, which was going badly. Sunwoo looked through the garden doors at the photograph on the mantel inside, his mother's picture. The one Sandra had carried to his doorstep in her bleeding hand, It was framed now, cleaned, given a place of honor. He thought about that night. The night he came home from a 14-hour negotiation and found a stranger dying on his steps. The night that should have been the worst night of his life. The night that cracked open every truth he had been living without and forced him to rebuild from the ground up. He thought about his mother, about 11 lost years, about the letters she wrote to him that he would never be able to answer, about the lullaby she hummed alone in a room in Scottsdale while he built an empire on the other side of a grief that was manufactured to keep them apart. He thought about Moonsick, about Whitfield, about the systems that crush people and the courage it takes to stand up and say no more. And he thought about Sandra, the woman who had no reason to keep a promise to a dying stranger, the woman who bled rather than break her word, the woman who hummed a lullaby in a garden and unlocked something in him that he had sealed shut at 19 years old and never expected to open again. He took her hand. She squeezed back. Her fingers fit between his like they had always been there. The man who built an empire out of grief finally understood what it meant to build a life out of love. It was messier, louder, more terrifying than any boardroom negotiation or business acquisition. It required a kind of courage that money could not buy and power could not guarantee. But standing in that garden with Sandra's hand in his, and the sound of Tobias laughing inside, and his mother's photograph watching over all of them from the mantel, Sunwoo Park was not afraid. For the first time in his life, he was home.